When Natalie Whitfield invited her black driver to the most prestigious horse race of the season, she thought she was about to teach him a lesson about his place in her world. But as the crowd fell silent and all eyes turned to Marcus Hale, it wasn't shame that filled the air. It was respect. The heiress, who had planned a moment of public humiliation, was about to discover that dignity can't be bought, class can't be inherited, and sometimes the person you're trying to embarrass ends up exposing everything ugly about yourself. What started as a cruel social experiment would spiral into a scandal that threatened everything the Whitfield family had built, forcing Natalie to choose between her inheritance and her heart. But Marcus had his own secrets about that racetrack, secrets that would change everything once the truth came out. If you're watching this story unfold, subscribe and tell me where you're from, because this tale of pride, prejudice, and unexpected love is about to take you on a ride you'll never forget. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Whitfield estate as Natalie adjusted her pearl earrings one last time. At 26, she had perfected the art of looking effortlessly elegant, even when her heart felt anything but peaceful. The marble floors of her childhood home echoed with each step of her designer heels as she made her way to the front entrance. Outside, Marcus Hale stood beside the black sedan, checking his watch. At 30, he carried himself with quiet confidence that came from years of hard work and steady patience. His navy uniform was pressed to perfection, and his dark eyes held a warmth that few people took the time to notice. When he saw Natalie approaching, he moved to open the car door. "Good morning, Miss Whitfield," he said with a respectful nod. "Good morning, Marcus." Natalie slid into the back seat, her phone already buzzing with messages. She glanced at the screen and felt her jaw tighten. Elliot Crane, her longtime friend from their social circle, had sent another teasing text. "Planning any charity work at the races this weekend? I hear you're bringing entertainment." The words stung more than they should have. Elliot had a way of making everything sound like a joke, but his comments lately felt sharper. Ever since she'd mentioned that Marcus would be joining her at the Marigold Stakes, Elliot's texts had grown more pointed. As Marcus pulled away from the estate, Natalie caught his eyes in the rearview mirror. He was focused on the road, professional as always. But something about Elliot's message made her feel small and mean-spirited. "Marcus," she said suddenly, her voice carrying an edge she didn't intend. "Clear your schedule for Saturday. You'll be my guest at the races." In the mirror, she saw his eyebrows lift slightly. "Of course, Miss Whitfield. What time would you like me to pick you up?" "No, you don't understand." She leaned forward, her tone growing more pointed. "You'll be attending as my guest, not working." A moment of silence filled the car. Marcus's hands remained steady on the steering wheel, but Natalie noticed the slight pause before he responded. "I appreciate the invitation," he said carefully. "I'll make sure I'm appropriately dressed for the occasion." Something in his tone made Natalie's chest tighten with shame, but she pushed the feeling away. She was being generous, wasn't she? Elliot would see that she wasn't the sheltered rich girl he sometimes made her out to be. When they reached her morning destination, the country club where she volunteered twice a week, Marcus came around to open her door. As she stepped out, he spoke quietly. "Miss Whitfield, about Saturday, should I plan to drive separately?" The question was practical, but it highlighted something Natalie hadn't fully considered. She was asking him to attend an event where he would normally be working, surrounded by people who knew him only as her driver. "Yes," she said quickly. "Drive separately. I'll text you the details." Marcus nodded. "I'll see you this evening for the pickup." As he drove away, Natalie's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Ava Green, her personal assistant, and one of the few people who spoke to her with complete honesty. "Coffee later? You seemed tense this morning." Natalie smiled despite herself. Ava had been with her for 3 years and had become more friend than employee. If anyone would understand her complicated feelings about Saturday, it would be Ava. That evening, as Marcus drove her home from a charity board meeting, Natalie found herself studying his profile in the fading light. He had worked for her family for 2 years, always punctual, always courteous, always maintaining exactly the right distance. She realized she knew almost nothing about his life outside of their professional interactions. "Marcus," she said as they turned into her neighborhood, "have you ever been to the races before?" "Yes, Miss Whitfield. I used to work at the stables when I was younger." This was news to Natalie. She leaned forward with genuine curiosity. "Really? What did you do there?" "General stable work. Grooming, feeding, some training assistants." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Natalie caught a hint of something warmer underneath. "I learned a lot about horses in those days." "Why did you leave?" Another pause. "Sometimes people make assumptions about where you belong. It became easier to find work elsewhere." The words hung in the air between them, and Natalie felt an uncomfortable twist in her stomach. She had invited him to the races to prove something to Elliot, but she was beginning to realize she hadn't thought about what it might mean to Marcus. When they arrived at her townhouse, Marcus walked around to open her door as he always did. As she stepped out, Natalie found herself looking at him, really looking, for the first time in months. He was handsome in a way that was both strong and gentle. His dark skin had a warm undertone in the porch light, and when he smiled, which was rare but genuine, his whole face changed. He carried himself like a man who had learned to be comfortable in his own skin, despite the world sometimes telling him he didn't belong. "Thank you for accepting the invitation," she said, meaning it more than she had when she first offered it. "Thank you for thinking of me," Marcus replied. "Have a good evening, Miss Whitfield." As he drove away, Natalie stood on her front steps longer than usual, watching his taillights disappear around the corner. Her phone buzzed with another message from Elliot, but for once, she didn't look at it right away. Inside her quiet townhouse, Natalie found Ava in the kitchen, organizing the next day's schedule over a cup of tea. "How was the board meeting?" Ava asked, looking up from her laptop. "Fine." Natalie poured herself a glass of wine and sat across from her assistant. "Ava, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think I'm out of touch?" Ava's dark eyes grew thoughtful. She was 27, only a year older than Natalie, but she had a way of seeing through people that came from growing up in a working-class family. "That's a loaded question," Ava said carefully. "What's bringing this up?" Natalie told her about the invitation to Marcus, about Elliot's comments, about the strange feeling that she had acted without thinking things through. When she finished, Ava was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Natalie, guests aren't props." The words hit harder than any of Elliot's sarcastic texts. Natalie felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and something deeper, shame. "I didn't mean," she started, but Ava held up a gentle hand. "I know you didn't mean to use him that way, but intentions and impact aren't always the same thing." Ava's voice was kind but firm. "Marcus is a good man. He deserves to be invited somewhere because you genuinely want his company, not because you want to prove a point to someone else." That night, Natalie lay in her king-sized bed staring at the ceiling. Her room was decorated in soft creams and pale blues, every piece chosen by an expensive designer. It was beautiful and cold, like much of her life. She thought about Marcus's comment about people making assumptions about where someone belongs. She thought about the way he had accepted her invitation with such careful politeness, and how she had phrased it more like a command than a genuine gesture of friendship. For the first time, she wondered what Saturday would look like from his perspective. Meanwhile, across town in a modest apartment, Marcus hung his navy blazer in the small closet and sat on the edge of his bed. The invitation had surprised him, but not in a good way. He had heard the edge in Natalie's voice, had recognized the tone of someone trying to prove something. He pulled out his phone and looked up the Marigold Stakes. It was one of the most prestigious events of the racing season, filled with exactly the kind of people who looked through him when he wore his driver's uniform. But Natalie had invited him as a guest, and Marcus had learned long ago that dignity meant accepting kindness at face value, even when the motives weren't entirely clear. He would go, he would be gracious, and he would hope that his presence wouldn't cause problems for either of them. In his dresser drawer, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a small pin from his days at the stables. It was nothing fancy, just a brass horseshoe with his initials engraved on the back, a gift from the head trainer when Marcus had left. He had never worn it since, but he pulled it out now and held it in his palm. Tomorrow, he would iron his best shirt and polish his only pair of dress shoes. He would show up as the man he was, with dignity and quiet pride, regardless of why he had been invited. As he placed the pin back in the drawer, Marcus made a silent promise to himself. He would not let anyone make him feel small, no matter how grand the setting or how pointed the whispers. Saturday morning arrived with perfect racing weather, clear skies and a gentle breeze that would keep the horses comfortable. Marcus arrived at the track early, wanting to get his bearings before the crowds arrived. He wore his navy blazer with a crisp white shirt and dark slacks, looking every bit as polished as any other guest. The Marigold Stakes was held at a historic racecourse that had been hosting events for over a century. The grandstand was elegant white wood with green trim, and the paddock area was surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. Marcus bought a program and walked the grounds, reacquainting himself with a world he had once known intimately. At 11:30, luxury cars began arriving at the main entrance. Marcus watched from near the paddock as Vivian Whitfield stepped out of a silver Mercedes, her silver hair perfectly styled and her pale blue dress clearly expensive. Behind her came Elliot Crane in a red sports car, his blonde hair catching the morning sun as he adjusted his sunglasses. Elliot spotted Marcus immediately and nudged Vivian. "Looks like Natalie's driver cleaned up nicely," he said with a smirk. "Bold choice for a +1. Vivian's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, but she said nothing. When Natalie arrived 15 minutes later in a taxi, a choice that didn't go unnoticed by the other guests, she looked stunning in a cream-colored dress that complemented her auburn hair. But when she saw Marcus standing confidently near the entrance, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition that he fit into this world better than she had expected. "Marcus," she said as she approached, her voice carefully controlled. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me," he replied with a slight nod. As they walked toward the paddock together, Natalie was acutely aware of the glances and whispered conversations around them. Elliot fell into step beside them, his presence both familiar and unwelcome. "Beautiful day for the races," Elliot said cheerfully. "Perfect weather for socializing." The way he said the last word made Natalie's stomach turn. She had invited Marcus to prove she wasn't the sheltered society girl Elliot sometimes accused her of being, but now she was beginning to see her invitation through different eyes. They reached the paddock area just as the horses were being led out for the first race. The magnificent animals moved with controlled power, their coats gleaming in the morning sun. Handlers walked beside them, speaking in low, calming voices. It was then that everything changed. A beautiful bay gelding, nervous in the crowd, suddenly shied at a fluttering banner. The young handler, caught off guard, stumbled as the horse reared up on its hind legs. People around the rail backed away quickly, some crying out in alarm. Without hesitation, Marcus stepped forward. His movement was calm and purposeful, with none of the panic that had seized the crowd. He approached the frightened horse from the side, his voice low and steady. "Easy, boy. Easy now." The horse's ears flicked toward the familiar tone as Marcus slowly extended his hand, letting the animal catch his scent. Then, with practiced ease, he placed a steady palm on the horse's neck, just below the halter. "You're all right," Marcus said softly, his other hand moving to block the horse's view of the banner that had spooked him. "Just take it easy." The transformation was immediate. The horse's breathing slowed, his muscles relaxed, and his hooves settled firmly on the ground. The crowd, which had been buzzing with nervous energy, fell completely silent. Marcus spoke quietly to the handler, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 20. "Keep your voice low and your hands soft. He's just overstimulated." She nodded gratefully, her face flushed with embarrassment and relief. From the edge of the crowd, Mr. Roscoe, the racecourse steward, had been watching the entire scene unfold. He was a man in his early 60s who had been working with horses for most of his life, and he recognized skill when he saw it. As the horse was led away, calm and steady once more, Roscoe approached Marcus with curiosity in his eyes. "That was well done," Roscoe said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who knew horses. "Hale, isn't it?" Marcus looked up, surprised to be recognized. "Yes, sir. Marcus Hale." "I remember you from Belmont years back. You had good hands then, too." A flush of pride crossed Marcus's face, quickly replaced by his usual modest demeanor. "Thank you, sir. I learned from good people." Natalie stood frozen nearby, watching this exchange with growing comprehension. The word "good" seemed to echo in her mind, carrying weight she hadn't expected. Around her, the whispered conversations had changed tone entirely. Instead of curious gossip about her unusual guest, people were murmuring about Marcus's skill and quick thinking. Elliot, for once, had nothing sarcastic to say. His expression had shifted from smug amusement to something more uncertain. Vivian Whitfield stood very still, her pale blue dress immaculate as always, but her eyes were troubled as she watched her daughter's face change. As the crowd began to disperse and move toward the clubhouse for lunch, the young handler approached Marcus one more time. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm still learning, and well, thank you." Marcus smiled, and for the first time that day, it was completely unguarded. "We all had to learn somewhere. You did fine." As they walked toward the clubhouse, Natalie found herself falling into step beside Marcus, but the easy conversation she had planned felt impossible now. The morning had revealed something about him and about herself that she wasn't prepared to face. In the corridor leading to the dining terrace, she finally found her voice. "Marcus, I think I owe you an apology." But before he could respond, a waiter appeared with champagne flutes, interrupting the moment. Around them, the lunch crowd was gathering, dressed in their finest clothes and ready to be seen. Natalie accepted a glass with a distracted smile, but her mind was still in the paddock, watching Marcus's steady hands calm a frightened horse while she stood by, finally understanding that her invitation had been a test of her own character, and she wasn't sure she had passed. The afternoon stretched ahead of them, filled with polite conversation and careful social navigation. But something fundamental had shifted in those few moments by the paddock rail, and Natalie knew that by the end of the day, nothing between them would be quite the same. As they moved toward the terrace where tables were set with crisp white linens and fresh flowers, Natalie caught sight of Elliot checking his phone with a small, satisfied smile. Whatever he was planning, she had the sinking feeling that the day's complications were just beginning. The luncheon terrace overlooked the main track, where horses thundered past in a blur of color and speed. White tablecloths fluttered gently in the breeze, and the sound of clinking glasses mixed with polite conversation. Natalie found herself seated between her mother and Elliot, while Marcus sat at the edge of their group, maintaining the careful distance he always kept in social situations. "The paddock incident was quite something," Vivian said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when discussing something distasteful. "Though I suppose some people are naturally good with animals." The pause before the last word hung in the air like smoke. Natalie felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment for her mother, but when she glanced at Marcus, his expression remained perfectly composed. Elliot leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Lucky thing our Marcus was there to save the day." The way he said, "our Marcus," made Natalie's stomach turn. "Tell me, do you miss working with horses?" "Sometimes," Marcus replied simply. "It's honest work." "Honest work," Elliot repeated as if testing the words. "How refreshing." Natalie wanted to say something, anything, to deflect the conversation away from the subtle mockery in Elliot's tone. But the words stuck in her throat. Under the table, her mother's hand touched her arm in warning, and Natalie found herself going quiet just when Marcus needed her to speak up. Marcus seemed to sense the tension building around the table. With practiced grace, he turned his attention to the catering staff, complimenting the presentation of the lunch and asking thoughtful questions about the menu. It was a masterful redirect that took the focus off himself while maintaining his dignity. From across the terrace, Ava appeared with a guest pass clipped to her pale green dress. She had arrived to handle some last-minute details for Natalie's upcoming charity event, but one look at the table told her everything she needed to know about how lunch was going. She caught Natalie's eye and saw the pained expression her friend was trying to hide behind a polite smile. As the meal wound down, Natalie stood abruptly. "I need some air," she announced, and walked toward the terrace exit before anyone could follow. Marcus found her 10 minutes later in the rose gardens that bordered the clubhouse. She was standing with her back to the path, her shoulders rigid with tension. "Miss Whitfield," he said softly. She turned, and he could see unshed tears in her green eyes. "Natalie," she said. "Just Natalie, please." "All right, Natalie." For a moment, they stood in the dappled sunlight filtering through the garden trees. The sound of the races continued in the distance, but here among the roses, the world felt quieter. "I invited you for the wrong reason," she said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "That was unkind of me. You deserved better." Marcus studied her face, seeing genuine regret there. "Thank you for saying it plainly. I don't know why Elliot has this way of making me feel like I need to prove something, like I'm too sheltered, too privileged to understand real people." She laughed bitterly. "The irony is, he was right." "Maybe," Marcus said carefully. "But understanding starts with recognizing what you don't know." Natalie nodded, grateful for his gentleness when she deserved his anger. "You mentioned working at the stables before. What happened there?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Natalie thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I was good at my job, really good. But there was an incident, equipment that went missing, blame that needed somewhere to land. It was easier to point fingers at the young black man than to look closer at who really had access." The words hit Natalie like a physical blow. "That's horrible." "It happens," Marcus said with a shrug that didn't hide the pain underneath. "I learned that it's better to walk away with your dignity than to fight battles you can't win. But I also learned that not everyone sees you the way a few bad people do. Like Mr. Roscoe today." "Like Mr. Roscoe today," Marcus agreed. "Good people recognize good work, regardless of who's doing it." They walked slowly back toward the clubhouse, the conversation continuing in gentle fits and starts. When they reached the terrace, Most of the lunch crowd had moved inside to watch the races from the climate-controlled viewing area. "Would you like to watch the next race?" Natalie asked. "I'd like that." But as they climbed the stairs to the clubhouse, Natalie heard Elliot's voice carrying from the bar area. He was talking to a small group of their mutual friends, his tone loud enough to ensure he would be overheard. "I have to admire Natalie's commitment to diversity," he was saying with false cheer. "Though I'm not sure parading the help counts as real social progress." The word help hung in the air like a slap. Natalie felt every muscle in her body tense, and she opened her mouth to respond, but found herself frozen by the weight of the moment. To defend Marcus now would be to admit that Elliot's words had power, that there was something shameful about Marcus being here. But to say nothing felt like a betrayal of everything she had just realized about herself. In her hesitation, the moment passed. Marcus heard the comment clearly, and though his expression didn't change, Natalie saw something shift in his eyes. A door closing, a wall going back up. They found seats near the viewing windows as the horses lined up for the next race. The afternoon sun slanted through the glass, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Around them, people chatted and laughed, placing bets and clinking glasses. But between Natalie and Marcus, a new kind of silence had fallen. When the race ended and people began filtering back to the terrace and bars, Natalie finally found her voice. "Marcus, about what Elliot said." "You don't need to explain other people's words," he said quietly. "But I need you to understand something. Respect has to look the same in private and in public. I can't be your guest in the garden and your employee in the dining room." The simple truth of it cut through all of Natalie's complicated feelings about social expectations and family pressure. He was right, and they both knew it. "I understand," she said, "and I promise to do better." "I believe you mean that," Marcus replied. "But meaning and doing aren't always the same thing." As they prepared to leave, Mr. Roscoe approached their table one more time. His weathered face was kind, but serious. "Mr. Hale, I wonder if you might have a moment." They stepped aside, and Natalie watched as the older man spoke quietly to Marcus. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw Marcus's face brighten with genuine surprise and pleasure. When he returned, there was something different in his expression. A spark of the enthusiasm she had glimpsed earlier in the paddock. "What did he say?" she asked. "He asked if I might help with a training clinic next week. Nothing official, just offering advice to some of the younger handlers." Marcus paused. "It's been a long time since someone asked for my opinion about horses." "Will you do it?" "I'd like to, if you don't mind me taking the time." "Of course I don't mind." Natalie felt a flush of shame that he would even need to ask. "Marcus, you know you have a life outside of driving me around, right? You don't need my permission to pursue opportunities." He smiled, but it was complicated. Sometimes the lines get blurry. As they walked to the parking area, Natalie made a decision. "Would you like to get coffee sometime this week? Somewhere away from all this?" She gestured toward the grandstand and the lingering crowd of well-dressed guests. "Just to talk, as friends." Marcus considered this. "Coffee sounds good. But let's be clear about what we're doing, Natalie. I won't be an experiment in personal growth for you, and I won't be proof that you're a good person. If we're going to be friends, it has to be because you actually want my friendship." The honesty of it took her breath away. "I do want your friendship. I need to figure out how to be worthy of it." Monday morning arrived with gray skies that matched Natalie's mood. She sat in the breakfast room of her family's estate, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate, while her mother read the society pages over coffee. The coverage from Saturday was quite positive. Vivian said, without looking up from her newspaper. Though there were some interesting photos. Natalie's stomach dropped. What kind of photos? Vivian folded the paper and slid it across the table. There, in the lifestyle section, was a photo of Marcus calming the frightened horse, his face focused and competent. The caption read, "Local hero steps in to assist during paddock incident at Marigold Stakes." It was a good photo that showed Marcus at his best, but Natalie knew her mother well enough to hear the disapproval underneath her careful words. "He looks very capable," Vivian continued, "though I do think you should be careful about the impression you're giving." "What impression is that, Mother?" "That you're confused about your place in the world." Vivian's voice was gentle but firm. "You have responsibilities to our name, to our family's reputation. People are watching. Maybe they should watch me do the right thing instead of the expected thing." Vivian set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "Darling, kindness is admirable, but there are appropriate ways to show it that don't require this level of public attention." Before Natalie could respond, Ava appeared in the doorway with her tablet and a sympathetic expression. "Your coffee meeting with Marcus is confirmed for this afternoon," she said. "Greenfinch Cafe on Maple Street. Quiet place, good for conversation." After Vivian left for her own appointments, Natalie found herself alone with Ava in the sunny breakfast room. "Your mother means well," Ava said carefully. "Does she? Sometimes I think she's more worried about what people will say than what's actually right." "Fear makes people protective of the wrong things," Ava replied. "But that doesn't make it your problem to solve." At 12:15, Natalie arrived at Greenfinch Cafe to find Marcus already seated at a corner table with 2 cups of plain coffee waiting. The cafe was exactly what she had hoped for: small, unpretentious, filled with the kind of people who minded their own business. "Thank you," she said as she slid into the seat across from him. "For what?" "For giving me another chance." Marcus wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, considering his words. "I want to tell you something about why I left the stables." Natalie nodded, sensing this was important. "I was 24, working as an assistant trainer at a track upstate. I loved that job more than anything I'd done before or since. The head trainer, Mr. Coleman, had been teaching me everything: how to read a horse's mood, how to spot lameness before it became serious, how to build trust with animals that had been mistreated." He paused to take a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. One day, expensive equipment went missing from the tack room. Saddles, bridles, things that could be easily sold. The barn manager started asking questions, and somehow the suspicion fell on me. Not because there was evidence, but because I was young. I was black, and I lived in the cheapest housing on the property. Natalie felt her chest tighten with anger on his behalf. Mr. Coleman knew I hadn't taken anything, but when the barn manager insisted on searching my room, Mr. Coleman didn't stop him. He said later that he was trying to clear my name quickly, but what I heard was that my word wasn't enough. What happened? They found nothing, of course. Turned out the stuff was taken by the barn manager's nephew, who had gambling debts. But by then, the damage was done. Everyone looked at me differently. The other workers, the owners who brought their horses to train, there was always a question mark hanging over my head. "So you left?" "I left," Marcus confirmed, "because I realized that no matter how good I was at my job, there would always be people ready to believe the worst about me. And I couldn't live like that, always having to prove my worth to people who had already decided what they thought." Natalie sat quietly, processing the weight of his story. Finally, she said, "I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm sorry I put you in a position this weekend where you had to prove yourself all over again. The difference," Marcus said gently, "is that Mr. Roscoe saw my work and recognized it for what it was. Not everyone will, but the right people do. I want to be one of the right people. Marcus smiled, the first truly warm smile she had seen from him. I think you're getting there. They spent the next hour talking about everything and nothing. Natalie learned that Marcus had grown up in a small town outside the city, that his father had been a mechanic and his mother taught elementary school. He learned that Natalie had majored in art history but had never found a way to use her degree for anything meaningful. When they parted ways outside the cafe, there was something different between them. Not the careful politeness of employer and employee, but the beginning of something more honest. Same time next week? Natalie asked. I'd like that, Marcus replied. But as they walked to their separate cars, neither of them noticed Elliot Crane sitting in his convertible across the street, his phone in his hand, and a calculating expression on his face. He had followed them from the estate, curious about what Natalie was up to, and now he had everything he needed for his next move. The photo he snapped showed Natalie and Marcus walking side by side, their heads bent together in conversation, looking for all the world like two people genuinely enjoying each other's company. Elliot's thumb hovered over the screen as he crafted a caption. Natalie Whitfield's new project seems to be going well. How progressive. The post went live on his private social media account, where it would be seen by all the right people, and all the wrong ones too. By evening, the whispers would begin. By week's end, they would become something much harder to ignore. But for now, in the parking lot of a small cafe, Natalie and Marcus said goodbye with the promise of coffee the following week, both of them feeling hopeful about the possibility of real friendship. Neither of them could have imagined how quickly that hope would be tested. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of soft light that made everything look golden. But Natalie felt anything but peaceful as she sat in the salon of her family's estate. Her mother moved around the room with practiced elegance, adjusting flower arrangements and checking her reflection in the antique mirror above the fireplace. The Hendersons are lovely people, Vivian said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her navy dress. And their son, David, will be joining us for dinner? He's just returned from London, you know. Something in international finance? Natalie barely heard her mother's words. She was staring at her phone, where Elliot's latest social media post had been forwarded to her by 3 different people in the last hour. The photo from the coffee shop was innocent enough, but the comments underneath were not. How charitable of her. Wonder what her father would think. Some people will do anything for attention these days. The worst part was that she recognized the names commenting. These were people she had grown up with, attended charity galas with, considered friends. Natalie. Her mother's voice cut through her thoughts. Did you hear what I said about David? Yes, Mother. International finance? Vivian sat down across from her daughter, and for the first time, Natalie saw genuine worry in her mother's pale eyes. Darling, we need to discuss this situation with your driver. His name is Marcus. Yes, Marcus. Vivian folded her hands carefully in her lap. I've seen some concerning photographs circulating. People are beginning to talk. Natalie felt a familiar surge of defiance, but it was tempered now by a new understanding of what those whispers meant for Marcus. Let them talk. It's not that simple. Vivian's voice was gentle but firm. Your reputation affects more than just you. It affects our family's standing, our charitable work, the business relationships your father spent decades building. So I should stop being friends with someone because other people might gossip? I'm asking you to consider the cost, to both of you. The words hit harder than Natalie expected, because they contained a truth she had been trying to ignore. Her friendship with Marcus didn't exist in a vacuum. Every coffee date, every public appearance together, would be scrutinized and judged by people who saw him only as her driver. "He's a good man, Mother." "I'm sure he is." Vivian's tone suggested she wasn't sure at all. But good people can still make choices that hurt them, and you. That night, Natalie lay awake thinking about her mother's words. She thought about the comments on Elliot's post, about the way people had whispered at the races, about the careful distance Marcus always maintained in social situations. By morning, she had made a decision. She called Marcus first thing, her hands shaking slightly as she dialed. "Good morning, Natalie." "Marcus, hi. I was wondering, would you like to take a drive tomorrow night? Nothing fancy. Just away from everything for a while?" There was a pause. "Are you all right? You sound upset." "I'm fine. I just think we both could use some time away from prying eyes." A drive sounds perfect. Saturday evening found them on a quiet road at the edge of the city, where the streetlights gave way to open fields and the sky stretched wide above them. Marcus had suggested they take his car, a reliable sedan that was comfortable but not flashy, and Natalie had agreed gratefully. They drove with the windows down, soft music playing from the radio. For the first time in days, Natalie felt like she could breathe. "This is nice," she said, settling back in the passenger seat. "Sometimes you need to get away from your own life for a while," Marcus replied. "Remember what it feels like to just exist?" They talked about small things, favorite restaurants they had discovered in the city, childhood memories of summer drives, the way certain songs could instantly transport you to a different time and place. It was the kind of easy conversation that Natalie had been craving without realizing it. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they turned onto a tree-lined road she had never seen before. "Of course." "Do you ever get tired of being so careful all the time? Of having to think about how everything you do might be misunderstood?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. "Every day. But the alternative is worse." "What's the alternative?" "Letting other people's ignorance make me smaller than I am. Giving up pieces of myself to make them comfortable." They stopped at a roadside diner that looked like it had been there since the 1950s, with red vinyl booths and black and white checkered floors. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, seated them by the window and brought them coffee without being asked. "You two are a lovely couple," she said with a warm smile. "How long have you been together?" Natalie felt her cheeks flush. "Oh, we're not—" "Thank you," Marcus said smoothly. "That's very kind." After the waitress left, Natalie looked at him questioningly. "Sometimes it's easier to let people think what they want to think," he explained. "Correcting every assumption gets exhausting." "But we're not a couple." "No," he agreed. "We're not. But for the next hour, in this place where no one knows us, what harm is there in letting a kind woman think we are?" Natalie found herself smiling. "When you put it like that—" They shared a piece of apple pie and talked about their dreams, the ones they had given up and the ones they were still chasing. Marcus told her about wanting to open his own training facility someday, a place where young people could learn to work with horses regardless of their background. Natalie admitted that she had always wanted to curate art exhibitions, but had never had the courage to try. "What's stopping you?" Marcus asked. "Fear, mostly. Of failing. Of not being good enough. Of people thinking I only got opportunities because of my family's money." "Those are all valid fears," Marcus said, "but they're not reasons to give up before you start." As they drove back toward the city, Natalie felt lighter than she had in weeks. The evening had reminded her of who she was outside of society, expectations, and family pressure. Just a woman talking to a friend about the things that mattered. "Thank you," she said as Marcus pulled up in front of her townhouse. I needed this more than I realized. Me too. He smiled, and in the soft glow of the streetlight, she was struck again by how handsome he was when he wasn't being careful. Same time next week? Definitely. As she got out of the car, Natalie felt hopeful for the first time in days. Maybe they could build something real despite all the obstacles. Maybe friendship was possible if they were both willing to be honest about what they wanted. She was still smiling when she reached her front door and saw her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, peering through her curtains with obvious disapproval. The smile faded as Natalie realized that even their quiet evening together hadn't gone unnoticed. Monday morning brought the storm Natalie had been dreading. She was in her home office, trying to focus on correspondence for an upcoming charity event, when Vivian called. "Natalie, I need you to come to the estate immediately." "What's wrong?" "We'll discuss it when you arrive." The tone in her mother's voice made Natalie's stomach clench with anxiety. An hour later, she sat in her father's study, while Vivian paced by the tall windows. On the mahogany desk between them was a printed copy of an email that had been forwarded to 3 different members of their country club's board of directors. The email contained the photo from Saturday night, Natalie and Marcus walking to his car, her hand on his arm, both of them smiling. The message was brief but cutting. Perhaps someone should mention to the Whitfield family that their domestic staff seemed confused about appropriate boundaries. "The board is meeting this afternoon," Vivian said without turning around. "There will be questions about our family's judgment." Natalie stared at the photo, feeling sick. In it, she and Marcus looked natural together, comfortable in a way that spoke of genuine affection. But she could see how it would appear to people determined to find scandal. "Mother, Marcus isn't domestic staff. He's a driver, and he's also my friend. Those distinctions may matter to you, but they won't matter to the people who are questioning our family's suitability for board positions." For the first time, Natalie understood the full scope of what was happening. Her father served on multiple nonprofit boards. Her mother chaired 2 major charity organizations. Their social standing wasn't just about personal reputation. It was tied to their ability to raise money and support causes they believed in. "So, what are you asking me to do?" Vivian finally turned from the window, her face showing every one of her 54 years. "I've drafted a letter to the staffing agency. We're going to request that Mr. Hale be reassigned to another family." "You can't do that." "I can, and I must. This situation has become untenable." Natalie stood up, her hands shaking with anger and fear. "I won't let you punish him for my choices. This isn't punishment, it's protection, for both of you." Before Natalie could respond, they heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Marcus had arrived for the Monday morning drive that had become routine over the past 2 years. "I'll handle this," Vivian said, reaching for the letter on the desk. "No." Natalie's voice was stronger than she felt. "If this conversation is going to happen, I'll be the one to have it." She walked outside to find Marcus standing beside the car, checking his phone. When he saw her approach, he looked up with a smile that faded quickly when he saw her expression. "Natalie? What's wrong?" "We need to talk." They stood in the circular driveway where they had shared so many polite good mornings and professional exchanges. The morning sun was bright and warm, but Natalie felt cold all the way through. "There's been some discussion about our friendship," she began carefully. "People have concerns about the appropriateness of our relationship." Marcus's face went very still. "I see. My mother thinks it would be better if you were reassigned to work for another family." "And what do you think?" The question was simple, but Natalie could hear everything underneath it. This was the moment that would define not just their friendship, but who she was as a person. I think it's wrong, she said. I think people are small-minded and cruel, and I hate that we're having to have this conversation at all. But Natalie looked up at the house where she had grown up, where her mother stood watching from the window of her father's study. She thought about the charity work that would suffer if their family lost credibility. She thought about the whispers that would follow Marcus to his next job if this situation became more public. But I don't know how to fix it, she admitted. I don't know how to protect you from the consequences of knowing me. Marcus nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting this conversation all along. I cannot work where I am a rumor, he said quietly, where every interaction between us becomes fodder for speculation and gossip. Marcus, I understand why your mother wants me reassigned, and I understand why you can't fight her on this. His voice was gentle, but there was finality in it that made Natalie's chest ache. But I won't wait to be dismissed like a problem that needs solving. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the keys to the estate's car. I resign, effective immediately. Please don't do this. I have to. Marcus placed the keys in her palm, his fingers warm against hers for just a moment. I won't be the cost of your comfort, Natalie. And I won't let anyone make me feel ashamed for being your friend. He turned to walk away, and Natalie felt something breaking inside her chest. Marcus, wait. He stopped, but didn't turn around. I'm sorry, she said, the words feeling inadequate and desperate. For all of it. For bringing you into this mess. For not being strong enough to fight for what's right. I know you are, he replied. But sorry doesn't change what happens next. Natalie watched him walk down the long driveway toward the street, where he would call a taxi to take him home to his small apartment and his uncertain future. She stood there holding his keys until he disappeared around the curve of the road, and then she stood there longer still, trying to figure out how wanting to be a better person had led to this moment of complete failure. Inside the house, Vivian was waiting with the reassignment letter, but it was no longer necessary. The problem had solved itself, the way problems often did when good people were forced to choose between their principles and their peace. By evening, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. Natalie sat in her room, staring at her phone, wanting to call Marcus, but knowing that any contact from her would only make his life more complicated. For the first time in her 26 years, she understood that good intentions weren't enough. That being a good person required courage she wasn't sure she possessed, and that sometimes losing someone you cared about was the natural consequence of not fighting hard enough to keep them. Monday morning stretched into afternoon with a heaviness that Natalie had never experienced before. She sat in her study, surrounded by charity event invitations and correspondence that suddenly felt meaningless. Every few minutes, she found herself looking toward the window, expecting to see Marcus's familiar figure by the car that now sat empty in the driveway. Ava found her there at 2 o'clock, still in her pajamas, staring at a blank computer screen. You missed 3 meetings, Ava said gently, setting down a cup of tea on the desk. I canceled them. All of them? Including the Children's Hospital Board? Natalie looked up for the first time in hours. I can't sit in a room full of people making decisions about doing good, while I can't even stand up for one friend. Ava pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. What are you going to do? I don't know. Natalie's voice was barely above a whisper. Ava, I hurt him. I let other people's small-mindedness matter more than doing what was right. Then fix it. How? He resigned. He won't take my calls. And honestly, why should he? I proved that I'm exactly the kind of person he was afraid I was. Ava was quiet for a moment, studying her friend's face. You know what I think? I think you're sitting here feeling sorry for yourself instead of figuring out how to make this right. The words stung, but they also cut through the fog of self-pity that had settled over Natalie since morning. Don't fix this with a donation or a public statement, Ava continued. Fix it with truth. Fix it by being the person he believed you could be. That evening, Natalie sat at her kitchen table with a piece of cream-colored stationery and a pen. She had started a dozen different letters and thrown them all away. How did you apologize for failing someone at the moment they needed you most? Finally, she wrote. Marcus, I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Not just for today, but for all the ways I've failed you as a friend. I invited you to the races for the wrong reasons. I let Elliot say cruel things without defending you. I was silent when I should have spoken up, and I let my fear of other people's opinions matter more than standing by someone I care about. You were right when you said respect has to look the same in private and in public. I understand now that friendship without courage isn't really friendship at all. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect you to want to see me again. But I needed you to know that losing you has taught me something important about the kind of person I want to be. I'm sorry it took hurting you for me to learn it. Natalie. She walked to his apartment building that same evening, her hands shaking as she slipped the envelope through the mail slot. Then she stood on the sidewalk for a long time, looking up at the lit windows and wondering which one was his. Tuesday passed without response. Natalie found herself checking her phone obsessively, jumping every time it buzzed with a message that wasn't from Marcus. Wednesday brought a text from Elliot. Heard about the driver situation. Probably for the best. Dinner this weekend? Natalie stared at the message for a long time before typing back. We won't be having dinner this weekend, or any weekend. Lose my number. She blocked his contact before he could respond. Thursday evening, her doorbell rang. Natalie's heart jumped, hoping against hope that it might be Marcus, but when she opened the door, she found a young woman in Postal Service uniform holding an envelope. Ms. Whitfield, this was returned to sender with a forwarding address. Thought you might want it back quickly. Natalie's heart sank as she recognized her own handwriting on the cream-colored envelope. The apartment building manager had forwarded it to Marcus's new address, but something had gone wrong with the delivery. She took the envelope with trembling hands and read the address label the postal worker had attached. 412 Oak Street, apartment 3B. 20 minutes later, she stood outside a modest apartment building on the other side of town, her letter clutched in one hand and her courage gathered in the other. The building was older but well-maintained, with window boxes full of late summer flowers and a small garden courtyard in the center. She climbed to the third floor and knocked softly on the door marked 3B. When Marcus opened the door, he looked surprised to see her, but not angry. His apartment was small and neat, with warm wood furniture and books lined up on simple shelves. Classical music played softly from a radio in the kitchen. Your letter was returned? Natalie said, holding out the envelope. I thought you should have it. Come in, he said, stepping aside. The apartment felt like him, calm, thoughtful, unpretentious. A stable pin sat on the small dining table next to a stack of newspapers, and Natalie realized it was the same pin she had glimpsed in his drawer that first night. You're wearing it again, she said, nodding toward the pin. Marcus looked down at his shirt, where the small brass horseshoe caught the light from the overhead fixture. Mr. Roscoe called yesterday. The training clinic is still on, if I want it. Paid position, working with junior handlers. That's wonderful. It's a start. Marcus gestured toward the small couch. Please, sit. They sat at opposite ends of the couch, the letter between them on the coffee table. Marcus had already opened it, Natalie realized. He had read her apology, her admission of failure, her promise to do better. "Thank you for writing this," he said. "It meant something to hear you say it all clearly. I should have said it sooner. I should have defended you when it mattered." "Yes," Marcus agreed simply. "You should have." The honesty of it hurt, but it was clean hurt. The kind that came from truth instead of confusion. "Can I ask you something?" Natalie said. "What would it take? For us to try again?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, looking at his hands. "I need to know that you see me as myself, not as a project or a test of your own goodness. I need to know that when people whisper about us, and they will, you'll remember that my dignity is just as important as your reputation." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because this won't get easier, Natalie. If we're friends, real friends, there will always be people who don't understand it. People who want to make it about something it's not." Natalie thought about her mother's worried face, about the country club board meeting, about the cruel comments on Elliot's social media posts. Then she thought about Marcus's steady hands calming the frightened horse, about his gentle wisdom during their quiet conversations, about the way he had walked away rather than let anyone make him feel ashamed. "I want to try again," she said, "if you're willing to let me." Marcus smiled, not the careful, professional smile she was used to, but the real one that changed his whole face. "Coffee tomorrow? Neutral ground?" "Coffee tomorrow," she agreed. Friday afternoon found them back at Greenfinch Cafe, sitting at the same corner table where they had talked a week earlier. But something fundamental had shifted between them. The politeness was gone, replaced by something more honest and therefore more fragile. "I need to tell you about a conversation I had with my mother," Natalie said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "All right." "I told her that I'm going to keep seeing you, as friends, and that she can either accept that, or we can have a very different kind of relationship going forward." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "How did she take it?" "She's adjusting, but I made it clear that this isn't a phase or a rebellion. This is me choosing my own values over other people's expectations." "That must have been difficult." "It was terrifying," Natalie admitted. "But it was also necessary. I can't keep living my life afraid of what people will say about my choices." They talked for over an hour, making plans that felt both small and significant. Marcus would help with the training clinic on weekends. Natalie would pursue the gallery curator position she had been too afraid to apply for. They would have dinner the following Friday at a restaurant where neither of them had to worry about being seen or judged. As they prepared to leave, Marcus reached across the table and touched her hand briefly. "Thank you," he said, "for fighting for this. For us. Thank you for giving me the chance to try again." The following Saturday morning found them at the race course for Marcus's first training clinic. Natalie had come to watch, sitting quietly in the stands while Marcus worked with 3 junior handlers in the schooling ring. She watched him demonstrate how to read a horse's body language, how to approach a nervous animal, how to build trust through consistency and patience. The young people hung on his every word, asking thoughtful questions and practicing the techniques he showed them. Mr. Roscoe stood nearby, nodding approvingly as Marcus guided a particularly skittish filly through a desensitization exercise. "He has a gift," said a voice beside Natalie. She turned to see her mother climbing the steps of the grandstand, elegant in a pale gray coat despite the casual Saturday setting. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Vivian sat down beside her daughter, her eyes fixed on the schooling ring below. "I wanted to see him work, to understand what you see in him." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching Marcus help a young man named David work with a bay gelding that had been refusing to load into the trailer. "Talk to him like he's your partner, not your problem," Marcus said gently. "Let him know you're on his side." The difference was immediate. The horse's ears pricked forward, his muscles relaxed, and within minutes, he was following David calmly up the ramp. "Remarkable," Vivian murmured. At noon, when the clinic ended, Marcus looked up toward the stands and saw both women watching him. He raised a hand in greeting, and Natalie waved back. "Would you like to meet him properly?" Natalie asked her mother. Vivian was quiet for a moment. "I think I would." They walked down to the paddock area, where Marcus was saying goodbye to the junior handlers. When he saw them approaching, he straightened slightly, his professional demeanor sliding back into place. "Marcus," Natalie said, "I'd like you to meet my mother. Mother, this is Marcus Hale." "Mrs. Whitfield," Marcus said with a respectful nod. Vivian studied his face for a moment, then extended her hand. "I misjudged you, Mr. Hale. I'd like to begin again." Marcus shook her hand, his expression careful, but not cold. "Thank you, ma'am. I'd like that too. I saw your work with the young people today. It's clear you have a real talent for teaching." "I enjoy it," Marcus replied. "There's something special about helping someone discover they can do something they didn't think was possible." Vivian nodded, and for the first time in weeks, Natalie saw genuine approval in her mother's eyes. As they walked back toward the parking area, Vivian fell into step beside Marcus. "Mr. Hale, I wonder if you might join us for dinner next week. Nothing formal, just an opportunity for us to get to know each other properly." "I'd be honored, ma'am." That evening, Natalie and Marcus sat in a small neighborhood restaurant with soft lighting and tables far enough apart for private conversation. They had ordered simply pasta for her, fish for him, and were sharing stories about their weeks. "Your mother surprised me today," Marcus said. "That took courage, coming to see me work." "She's trying," Natalie replied. "I think she's beginning to understand that this isn't about charity or rebellion. It's about friendship." "Is it?" Marcus asked quietly. "Just friendship?" The question hung between them, acknowledging something that had been growing beneath the surface of their careful rebuilding. Natalie felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I know I care about you. I know I want you in my life, but I also know we need to take this slowly. Build something real before we try to name it." Marcus smiled. "Slowly sounds right." As they walked to their cars after dinner, Natalie felt lighter than she had in months. The evening had been easy in a way that felt both new and familiar, full of the kind of comfortable silence that spoke of genuine understanding. "Same time next week?" Marcus asked as they reached her car. "Definitely." He leaned down and kissed her cheek softly, a gesture that was tender without being presumptuous. "Good night, Natalie." "Good night, Marcus." As she drove home through the quiet streets, Natalie thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had required her to confront parts of herself she didn't like, to choose courage over comfort, to risk disapproval in service of something real. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. 3 months later, on a crisp December afternoon, Natalie stood in the doorway of a small art gallery downtown, watching people examine the photographs she had curated for her first exhibition. The show featured local artists whose work explored themes of community and connection, and it had drawn a diverse crowd of art lovers, critics, and curious neighbors. Marcus stood near the back of the gallery, engaged in animated conversation with one of the photographers about the technical aspects of a particular piece. He wore the stable pin on his jacket lapel, and Natalie smiled when she saw a young girl ask him about it. "It represents something I love," she heard him tell the child. Sometimes, we have to be brave enough to show people who we really are. Across the room, Vivian chatted with the gallery owner about the possibility of making the exhibition a quarterly event. She had become one of Natalie's strongest supporters, using her social connections to promote the gallery and bring in new collectors. Ava appeared beside Natalie with 2 glasses of wine. "Proud of you," she said simply. "Thank you. For everything. For pushing me to be better. You did the hard part. You chose love over fear." As the evening wound down and the last visitors filtered out, Marcus approached Natalie near the front window, where a striking photograph of 2 children sharing a book was displayed. "Successful first show," he said, slipping his arm around her waist. "I couldn't have done it without you. Any of it." "Sure you could have. You just needed to believe you were allowed to try." They stood together in the quiet gallery, surrounded by art that celebrated the complexity and beauty of human connection. Through the window, the city lights twinkled like promises, and Natalie felt grateful for every difficult conversation and painful moment that had led them here. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked. "How sometimes the wrong reasons for doing something can lead you to the right place." "Meaning?" "I invited you to those races to prove I wasn't the person Elliot said I was. But in the end, you helped me become the person I actually wanted to be." Marcus turned her to face him, his dark eyes warm with affection and something deeper. "We helped each other," he said. "That's what real partnerships do." "Partnerships?" He smiled and touched her cheek gently. "I love you, Natalie. I have for months. I was just waiting for the right moment to say it." "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and perfectly natural. "I think I have since that first day in the paddock, watching you calm that horse. You showed me what quiet strength looks like." As they kissed in the soft light of her first gallery showing, surrounded by art that celebrated the courage to connect across difference, Natalie thought about how far they had both come. They had started as employer and employee, become unlikely friends, survived the pressure of other people's expectations, and emerged as partners in the truest sense. It hadn't been easy, but the best things never were. Outside, the December wind whispered promises of a new year, full of possibilities they would discover together. Inside the gallery, 2 people who had learned to choose love over fear held each other close, grateful for second chances and the wisdom that came from refusing to let others define what was possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new whispers, new opportunities to choose courage over comfort. But tonight, in the warm light of acceptance and the quiet strength of commitment, they had everything they needed. They had each other, and they had the unshakable knowledge that real love, the kind built on mutual respect, honest communication, and the willingness to fight for what mattered, could survive anything the world threw at it. As they walked hand in hand into the December evening, Natalie and Marcus carried with them the certainty that they had found something worth protecting. Not just their love for each other, but their shared commitment to building a life based on authenticity rather than expectation. It was a beginning disguised as an ending, a promise wrapped in possibility, a love story that had started with all the wrong reasons and arrived at all the right ones. And in the quiet space between one breath and the next, they both knew they were exactly where they belonged.